This is Grandmaster Daniel Naroditsky. We're watching the world champion take on Greek Grandmaster Dimitrios Mastrovasilis at the 2021 FIDE World Rapid and Blitz. And Magnus essaying a close Sicilian, potentially knight c3 could lead to a lot of different things, but now he plays knight f3. Will he transpose back into a regular Sicilian? Mastrovasilis playing the Taimanov setup, and there's d4. So they've transposed back into a regular Sicilian. Queen c7 would lead to the Taimanov. a6 is another version of that move. Now, Magnus has many options in this position. White literally has 8 or 9 viable setups. And you can see the world champion fidgeting with probably the pawn that he's just captured as he decides what setup to play. Bishop e3, bishop e2, g3. Literally any developing move, except bishop d3 perhaps, is a possible system. And Magnus taking quite a bit of time to decide what he wants to play here, and he plays g2, g4. One of the most aggressive systems available, and this move has been very popular recently. And Mastrovasilis, did I sense a little bit of surprise at that move? I can definitely see that move being played in some top tournaments these days. Let's see what the Greek Grandmaster has in store for it. Knight g7 is possible here. Now, the idea of g4 is to push that pawn up to g5 as quickly as possible. So the move knight f6 right now would walk right into the idea of that move. You don't want to develop that g8 knight to f6. Mastrovasilis, he trades on d4, and will he play knight e7, knight c6? No, he plays b7, b5, a typical Sicilian move, preparing action on the queen side. And Magnus hesitating there. Will he play a3 to stop b4? No, he gets his dark squared bishop out to e3, allowing Mastrovasilis to push his pawn to b4 if he wants to. But the drawback of playing b4 would be that it allows knight a4 and knight b6. So I don't think that the Greek GM should push that b pawn any further, and he does not. He develops his own light squared bishop. Magnus castling queenside. He seems very relaxed here. He seems confident. And that queen on d4 could be really intimidating. So that g8 knight, where is it going to go? How is Mastrovasilis going to develop his g8 knight? Will he play knight g8 to e7 to c6 in order to try to chase the white queen away from d4 and involve that knight in the queenside attack? That's the idea that I've seen in this line. But he continues to take his time. Rook c8 may be also possible. Yep, he plays rook c8. But he's not really preparing bishop c5 because then the g7 pawn is going to be hanging. So I still think that he's going to have to deal one way or another with the white queen on d4. But Magnus playing f3, which enables bishop c5. Now bishop c5 is possible because then queen takes g7 hangs the bishop on e3 with check. So bishop c5 would necessitate queen d2, and Mastrovasilis taking that opportunity, developing his bishop to c5. Queen drops back to d2, and will we have a trade of dark squared bishops here? Well, the drawback of that for black would be that the d6 square would be really weakened. So everything here has a drawback. It seems like Dimitrios here a little bit uncomfortable with his position, as you can see him hesitating, and he does go for the trade of bishops. Queen takes e3. For a Sicilian, the game is moving very slowly and in a positional direction. What about queen d4 now, attacking g7 and also taking d7 under white's eye? That could be an unpleasant move because then that black could be unable to castle. And Magnus does exactly that. Queen e3 to d4. Now if black castles, he hangs the d7 pawn with a fork against black's 2 minor pieces. That would be completely unthinkable. But how else does Dimitrios defend the g7 pawn? The move f7, f6. If we have Ben Feingold in the room, we know he'll be disapproving of that. That's a really weakening move, which creates a lot of holes on the king side. d6 square is also a hole. And Mastrovasilis doesn't have anything going yet on the queen side. It seems like he's gotten the shorter end of the stick here out of the opening, but can he wheel himself out of this situation as he bites the bullet, plays f6? There was no other good way to defend g7. And how does Magnus improve his position? First of all, Magnus still needs to complete his development. His light squared bishop is still on its initial square. Will he bring it out to e2 or g2? Will he keep pushing his kingside pawns with f4? A lot of decisions here to be made by the world champion. Magnus leans back in his chair. You can see the deliberation, the thought that goes into every move, even in a blitz game, as he hesitates. And he does play bishop e2. Not the most active move, but it does connect the rooks, and it does in some cases prepare f3, f4. And Mastrovasilis getting his queen out, putting it on c7, putting pressure on white's c2 pawn. Now if the knight moves, Magnus would get checkmated. I don't think he's going to move the knight. He doesn't have any plans to do that, but he can also play rook d2 in order to lend a little bit of reinforcement to that c2 pawn so that his knight would be free to roam about the cabin. Black could then play knight e7 to c6. That idea is still on the table, chasing white's queen away from d4. Magnus making the typical prophylactic move, king b1, getting the king out of the x-ray of the queen and the rook. And I still think the black's position is quite uncomfortable. Black still cannot castle because you still give up the d7 pawn. Knight, not c6, but g6. What an interesting maneuver. The knight going to the weak dark square on f4, but Magnus striking at the other side with a2, a4. Great move by Magnus. Now that b5 pawn is under pressure from 3 different sources. And if black has to take on a4, then that weakens the entire queenside. Mastrovasilis, he tries to defend it with bishop c6, but doesn't that give up the pawn? No. A takes a very creative way of defending. Taking on b5 would give up the c2 pawn, but Magnus playing queen b4, another great response, threatening bishop takes b5. And my worry is that Mastrovasilis is about to lose that b pawn, and he still cannot castle now because it would be illegal. The queen on b4 controls the f8 square. Queen b4 is a nasty move, and that will that knight on g6 move into f4. Mastrovasilis has to find the best way to sacrifice the pawn on b5. He has to part ways with it, and he goes queen e5. But what if Magnus takes that pawn with his knight? What if Magnus takes that pawn with his knight? And now the knight is heading to d6. This is big trouble for Mastrovasilis. And if he takes the knight, then Magnus recaptures with his bishop, and the d7 pawn is going to be hanging. And that pressure is going to be unbearable, and rook b8 is played by Mastrovasilis, but now knight d6 check. Knight d6 check looks like it almost wins the game, but then black is going to go king e8 to e7. Mastrovasilis might hang on, even though Magnus has a discovered check possibility there. Is there a knockout blow after knight d6, king e7? Well, we're about to find out because Magnus has played knight d6. King e7, and bishop b5. What a move. Intercepting the rook. And bishop takes b5, loses the queen to knight c4. I don't know if Mastrovasilis has a move here. He can't move his king because of the fork on f7. And he takes on b5, but now knight c4 wins the queen. Knight c4 wins the queen, and Magnus, a little consternation, but he finds a knight c4 check. And he's going to pick up the queen because the king is in check. There's no way to block d6, and knight takes e5, and everything is collapsing. And Mastrovasilis resigns. A masterful display by the world champion once again. If you like videos like this, make sure to click the link in the playlist. Thank you so much for watching.